The buzzards were already circling when Rowland spotted the crumpled figure lying face down in the Arizona sand. And for a moment, he thought he was too late. He pulled hard on the reins, bringing his stallion to a halt as dust kicked up around them in the unforgiving heat of July 1882. The sun bore down mercilessly on the desert landscape between Holbrook and the small town of Eager, where Blake had been heading to deliver a message to the territorial marshal. His throat was parched despite the water in his canteen, and he could only imagine what condition this person was in, lying exposed to the elements without any visible shelter or supplies nearby. Blake dismounted quickly, his boots hitting the hard, packed earth as he approached the figure. As he drew closer, he realized it was a woman, her dress torn and dusty, her dark hair matted with sand and sweat. He knelt beside her, pressing 2 fingers against her neck to check for a pulse. It was there, faint but steady, and relief flooded through him. "Miss, can you hear me?" he asked, gently turning her onto her back. She was young, maybe 22 or 23, with delicate features that were sunburned and cracked lips that spoke of severe dehydration. Her eyelids fluttered but did not open. Blake acted quickly, retrieving his canteen and carefully lifting her head, letting a small amount of water trickle onto her lips. "Come on now," he murmured. "You need to drink." The woman's lips parted slightly, and he managed to get a few drops into her mouth. She coughed weakly, and her eyes opened just a sliver, unfocused and glazed with confusion and fear. "Please," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Help." "You're safe with me now," Blake said firmly, his voice carrying the kind of steady reassurance that came from years of facing trouble head-on. "I've got you." He lifted her carefully into his arms, surprised by how light she felt, as though she had been out here for days without food or water. He carried her to his horse, and with some maneuvering, managed to get her situated in front of him on the saddle. She slumped against his chest, barely conscious, as he wrapped one arm securely around her waist and took up the reins with the other. The ride to Eager took nearly 2 hours, and Blake kept talking to her the entire way, knowing that keeping her engaged, even minimally, might be the difference between life and death. He told her about the landscape they were passing, about his horse Thunder, about the weather. He did not know if she heard any of it, but her shallow breathing against his chest told him she was still alive. And that was what mattered. When the buildings of Eager finally came into view, Blake felt a wave of relief. The town was small, with a main street lined with wooden structures that included a general store, a saloon, a church, and most importantly, a doctor's office. Blake guided Thunder directly to the doctor's house, a modest building on the edge of town marked by a white sign with black lettering. "Doc Harrison," Blake shouted as he dismounted, carefully keeping the woman supported against him. "Doc, I need help." The door swung open, and a gray-haired man in his 50s emerged, his spectacles perched on his nose. Dr. Charles Harrison took one look at the woman in Blake's arms and immediately stepped aside. "Bring her in, quickly," the doctor instructed, leading the way to an examination room. Blake carried her inside and laid her gently on the examination table. Now, in the better light of the room, he could see the full extent of her condition. Her face and arms were severely sunburned, her lips cracked and bleeding. Her dress was torn in several places, and there were scratches and bruises on her exposed skin. "What happened to her?" Dr. Harrison asked as he began his examination, checking her pulse and looking into her eyes. "Found her out in the desert between here and Holbrook," Blake explained. "No horse, no supplies, nothing, just lying there in the sand." The doctor worked quickly, calling for his wife to bring water and clean cloths. Mrs. Harrison, a kindly woman who often assisted her husband, hurried in with the requested items and began helping to clean the woman's face and arms. "She's severely dehydrated and suffering from heat exhaustion," the doctor said after several minutes of examination. "She's lucky you found her when you did, Mr. Rowland. Another few hours and we would be having a very different conversation." Blake nodded, his jaw tight. He watched as the doctor and his wife worked to stabilize the young woman, getting fluids into her and treating her burns and wounds. After about 20 minutes, her color began to improve slightly, and her breathing became less labored. "Will she be all right?" Blake asked. "I believe so, with proper care and rest," Dr. Harrison replied. "She'll need to stay here for observation, at least for the next day or two. Do you know who she is?" Blake shook his head. "Never seen her before. She didn't say much, just asked for help." "Well, once she's stronger, perhaps she can tell us what happened." The doctor looked at Blake with curiosity. "You were on your way somewhere, weren't you? I know you don't usually come through eager." "Message for Marshal Thornton," Blake said, "but that can wait. I'd like to stay and make sure she's going to be all right, if you don't mind." "Not at all. You're welcome to wait in the parlor. I'll let you know when she's more alert." Blake spent the next several hours in the Harrisons' modest parlor, drinking the coffee Mrs. Harrison brought him and trying to piece together what might have happened to the woman. Eager was in the heart of Apache country, though relations had been relatively peaceful lately. Still, there were always dangers in the territory: outlaws, wild animals, the elements themselves. For a woman to be alone in the desert suggested something had gone very wrong. It was nearly sunset when Dr. Harrison came to find him. "She's awake and asking about the man who found her." Blake followed the doctor back to the examination room, where the woman was now propped up on pillows, a blanket covering her. Her eyes were clearer now, a striking shade of green that caught him off guard. Despite her ordeal, he could see she was quite beautiful. "Miss, this is Blake Rowland," Dr. Harrison said gently. "He's the one who found you and brought you here." The woman looked at Blake, and he saw tears begin to form in her eyes. "You saved my life," she said softly. "I thought I was going to die out there." Blake approached the bed, hat in his hands. "I'm just glad I came along when I did. How are you feeling?" "Like I've been trampled by a herd of cattle," she admitted with a weak smile, "but grateful to be alive. Dr. Harrison says if you had found me even an hour later, I might not have made it." "What's your name, miss?" Blake asked gently. Emma Jensen." She took a shaky breath. "I was traveling with a wagon train from Santa Fe to California. We were attacked 3 days ago by outlaws. They took our money, our supplies, shot several of the men." Her voice broke. "My father was the wagon master. They killed him when he tried to fight back." Blake felt anger rise in his chest. "I'm sorry for your loss." Emma wiped at her eyes. "In the chaos, I ran. I just ran into the desert, and I kept running until I couldn't anymore. I thought if I headed west, I might find help, but I got turned around. I had no water, no food. I walked for 2 days before I collapsed." She looked at Blake with those green eyes. "You're the answer to my prayers, Mr. Rowland." "Just Blake," he said quietly, "and you don't need to thank me. Any decent person would have done the same." Dr. Harrison cleared his throat. "Miss Jensen needs rest now. We can discuss more in the morning." Blake nodded. "I'll be at the boarding house if you need anything. I'll check in tomorrow." As he turned to leave, Emma called out, "Blake." He looked back at her. "Thank you," she said simply, "for telling me I was safe with you." I held onto those words. Something stirred in Blake's chest, something he had not felt in a long time. He gave her a small nod and left, stepping out into the cool evening air of Eager. The next morning, Blake returned to the doctor's house after a restless night at the boarding house. He had spent hours thinking about Emma Jensen and her story, about the wagon train attack and the outlaws who were apparently still roaming the territory. He had also sent a telegram to Marshal Thornton in Holbrook, informing him about the attack and asking for information about any similar incidents in the area. Mrs. Harrison greeted him at the door with a smile. "She's doing much better today. Ate some breakfast and is sitting up. The doctor says she's remarkably resilient." Emma was indeed sitting up in bed when Blake entered, and the improvement in her appearance was striking. Her face was still sunburned, but some of the color had returned to her cheeks. Her dark hair had been cleaned and braided, and she wore a clean nightgown that Mrs. Harrison must have provided. "Good morning," Blake said, his hat in his hands again. "Good morning," Emma replied, and this time her smile was stronger. "I was hoping you would come back. I wanted to properly thank you for what you did." "No need for thanks," Blake said, pulling up a chair beside the bed. "I'm just glad you're doing better. Dr. Harrison says you're resilient." Emma laughed softly. "I come from tough stock. My father always said the Jensen family was like mesquite trees, able to survive in the harshest conditions." Her expression grew sad. "He would have wanted me to survive this." "Can you tell me more about what happened?" Blake asked gently. "I sent word to the marshal, but any details you can provide might help them catch the men who did this." Emma took a deep breath, gathering her thoughts. "There were about 15 wagons in our train. We left Santa Fe 2 weeks ago, heading to California where my uncle has a ranch near Sacramento. My mother died 2 years ago, and it was just my father and me. He had been a wagon master for 10 years, knew the trails better than anyone." She paused, taking a sip of water from the glass beside her bed. "We were camped for the night, about a day's ride from Holbrook. It was supposed to be a safe area, but around midnight they attacked. There must have been 8 or 9 of them, masked, shooting into the air to scatter the horses and frighten everyone." Blake listened intently as she continued. "They wanted the strong box where the families kept their money and valuables. My father tried to negotiate with them, tried to keep people calm, but their leader, he was cruel. He shot my father just to make a point, to show everyone they meant business." Emma's voice wavered, but she kept going. "After they took what they wanted, they set fire to 2 of the wagons and rode off. People were screaming, crying. I was kneeling beside my father, he was still breathing, and he told me to run. He said, 'Emma, you run and you don't look back. Get to safety.' Those were his last words to me." Blake felt a surge of anger toward the men who had done this. "You did what he told you to do, you survived." "I don't even know if anyone else survived," Emma said, tears flowing freely now. "I just ran. I was so scared and I just kept running. By the time dawn came, I had no idea where I was. I tried to find my way back, but everything looked the same. I walked in what I thought was the right direction, but I must have been going in circles. The sun was so hot, and I had no water. On the second day, I knew I was dying. I prayed that someone would find me, and then you did." Blake reached out and gently took her hand. "You're safe now, Emma, and we'll find out what happened to the rest of your wagon train. The marshal will investigate." Emma looked down at their joined hands, and Blake was suddenly very aware of how natural it felt to touch her, to offer her comfort. He started to pull away, but she held on. "Will you stay in Eager for a while?" she asked quietly. "I don't know anyone here, and I have nowhere to go. My uncle is expecting us in California, but I have no way to reach him, no money to send a telegram. Everything was in the wagon." "I'll stay," Blake said without hesitation, "at least until we know you're fully recovered and figure out what your next steps should be." Relief flooded Emma's face. "Thank you. I know I'm asking a lot from a stranger, but I have no one else." "You're not asking too much," Blake assured her. "And I'm not a stranger anymore. I'm someone who cares about what happens to you." The words surprised them both, but Blake realized he meant them. In the short time since he had found her, He had become invested in Emma Jensen's well-being in a way that went beyond simple human decency. Over the next few days, Blake remained an eager, visiting Emma every day as she recovered. Dr. Harrison moved her from the examination room to a spare bedroom in his house, where she could rest more comfortably. Blake helped pay for her care and board, despite Emma's protests that she would find a way to repay him. During his visits, they talked for hours. Emma told him about her life in Santa Fe, about growing up traveling the wagon trails with her father, about her dreams of starting fresh in California, where she hoped to become a schoolteacher. Blake found himself sharing things he rarely discussed with anyone about his own family, his work as a courier and occasional lawman, the loneliness of life on the trail. "You must think I'm foolish," Emma said one afternoon as they sat in the Harrisons' small garden behind the house. She was finally well enough to walk around, though she still tired easily. A woman of 23 with no husband, no home, traveling across the country on a dream. "I don't think you're foolish at all," Blake said honestly. He was 26 himself and unmarried, something that made him an oddity in a time when most men his age had wives and children. "I think you're brave. It takes courage to start over." Emma looked at him with those green eyes that seemed to see right through him. "What about you, Blake Rowland? What are your dreams?" Blake was quiet for a moment, considering. "I suppose I've always wanted a place of my own. A ranch, maybe, where I could raise horses. I've spent most of my life drifting from town to town, taking jobs where I can find them. It's a living, but it's not a life, if you know what I mean." "I do," Emma said softly. "We're both looking for a place to belong." Their eyes met, and Blake felt something shift between them, something deeper than gratitude or friendship. He found himself thinking about Emma at all hours of the day, worrying about her when he was not with her, feeling a lightness in his chest when he saw her smile. On the 5th day after finding her, Blake received a telegram from Marshal Thornton. The news was grim. The marshal and his men had found the remains of the wagon train. 3 people had been killed in the attack, including Emma's father, and the rest had scattered. Some had made it to Holbrook, others had turned back toward Santa Fe. The outlaws had not been caught, but there were reports of a gang operating in the territory, led by a man named Jack Donovan. Blake sat with Emma in the garden as he told her the news. She cried for her father for the life she had lost, but there was also a sense of closure in knowing what had happened. "At least the others are safe," she said, wiping her eyes. "At least it wasn't worse." "The marshal is still looking for Donovan and his gang," Blake told her. "They'll face justice for what they did." Emma nodded, then looked at Blake with determination in her eyes. "I want to go to California. I know it won't be easy, but that's where I was heading and that's where I want to go. My uncle is there and he'll help me once I arrive." "How will you get there?" Blake asked. "Do you have any money?" Emma shook her head. "Nothing. Everything I owned was in the wagon. I'll have to find work here in Eager, save up enough for passage." Blake was quiet for a moment, an idea forming in his mind. It was bold, maybe even reckless, but it felt right. "What if I took you?" Emma stared at him. "What? What if I took you to California?" Blake repeated. "I have enough money saved. We could take the stage to Prescott, then on to San Diego and up to Sacramento. It would take a few weeks, but it would be safer than you traveling alone." "Blake, I couldn't ask you to do that," Emma protested. "You've already done so much for me. You're not asking, I'm offering." Blake leaned forward, his expression earnest. "Emma, I care about what happens to you. The thought of you struggling here alone, trying to scrape together enough money while you have family waiting for you in California, it doesn't sit right with me. Let me do this for you." Emma's eyes filled with tears again, but this time they were tears of gratitude and something else, something that mirrored what Blake was feeling. "Why are you being so kind to me? You don't even know me." "I know enough," Blake said quietly. "I know you're brave and strong and you've been dealt a terrible hand. I know that finding you in that desert changed something in me. I can't explain it, Emma, but I need to see this through. I need to make sure you get to where you're meant to be." Emma reached out and took his hand, and the touch sent warmth flooding through Blake's entire body. "All right," she said softly. "I'll let you take me to California, but Blake, I will find a way to repay you, I promise." "There's nothing to repay," Blake said, squeezing her hand gently. "Just promise me you'll let me help you, no arguments." Emma smiled, a real, genuine smile that lit up her entire face. No arguments. They left eager a week later, after Dr. Harrison declared Emma fully recovered from her ordeal. Mrs. Harrison had donated some clothing to Emma. Simple dresses and practical traveling outfits that would serve her well on the journey. The townspeople, having heard Emma's story, had also pitched in, providing her with a small bag of essentials and even a little money. Blake arranged for them to take the stage to Prescott, a journey of several days. As they boarded the coach that warm morning in late July, Blake felt a sense of purpose he had not experienced in years. Emma sat beside him in the cramped coach, which they shared with a merchant and his wife and an older gentleman traveling to visit family. The landscape rolled by outside the windows, the high desert giving way to mountain forests as they climbed in elevation. Emma was quiet for much of the first day, watching the scenery with wide eyes. Blake could see her processing everything that had happened, grieving for her father while also trying to look forward to what lay ahead. That night, they stopped at a way station, a rough establishment that offered basic beds and meals. Blake secured separate rooms for himself and Emma, wanting to protect her reputation even as he acknowledged the growing feelings between them. Over dinner in the common room, Emma seemed to relax, talking more freely about her memories of her father and her hopes for the future. "He would have liked you," she said suddenly, looking at Blake across the rough wooden table. "My father, I mean. He was a good judge of character, and he would have seen what kind of man you are." Blake felt warmth creep up his neck. "I would have liked to meet him. He always told me I should marry someone strong and kind, someone who would treat me as an equal partner." Emma's cheeks colored slightly. "Not that I'm suggesting, I mean. I wasn't implying that we." Blake reached across the table and took her hand, stopping her flustered explanation. "Emma, I know we haven't known each other long, but I want you to know that whatever this is between us, I feel it too. I'm not going to rush you or push you into anything, but I need you to know that my feelings for you are real." Emma's eyes widened, and then her face broke into a beautiful smile. "I feel it too, Blake. I know it's fast, maybe too fast, but when you held me on your horse and told me I was safe with you, something in my heart recognized you." "Does that sound foolish?" "Not at all," Blake said, his thumb rubbing gentle circles on the back of her hand. "It sounds like the truth." They sat like that for a long moment, hands joined across the table, the noise of the other travelers fading into the background. Blake felt as though he was standing at the edge of something momentous, a future he had not dared to imagine for himself. The journey to Prescott took 4 more days. Each day brought Blake and Emma closer together, both literally and figuratively. They talked about everything and nothing, sharing stories and dreams and fears. Blake learned that Emma loved to read, that she could quote poetry from memory, that she had a quick wit and a kind heart. Emma learned that Blake had grown up on a small ranch in Texas, that he had left home at 18 after his parents died of fever, that he had been drifting ever since, looking for a place to belong. In Prescott, they had a 2-day layover before the next stage to San Diego. Blake used the time to purchase proper traveling clothes for Emma and to send a telegram to her uncle in Sacramento, informing him that Emma was safe and on her way to California. "You think of everything," Emma said with amazement as Blake showed her the receipt for the telegram. They were sitting in a small cafe, enjoying coffee and pastries, a luxury after days of road food. "I just want to make sure everything goes smoothly for you," Blake replied. "Your uncle will want to know you're safe." Emma reached across the small table and covered his hand with hers. "Blake, I need to tell you something. When we get to California, when I'm with my uncle and safe, I don't want you to leave right away. I know you probably need to get back to your work, back to your life, but I'm not ready to say goodbye to you yet." Blake turned his hand over, lacing his fingers with hers. "Emma, I don't think I could leave you even if I wanted to, and I don't want to. Whatever is happening between us, I want to see where it goes. Even though we've only known each other a few weeks," Emma asked softly. "Especially because of that," Blake said. "In the short time I've known you, you've become the most important person in my life. That's not something I take lightly." Emma's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "I've fallen in love with you, Blake Rowland. I know it's too soon to say it. I know people will think I'm foolish or that I'm just grateful to you for saving my life, but it's more than that. You're everything I didn't know I was looking for." Blake felt his heart swell in his chest. He stood from his seat and moved to Emma's side of the table, kneeling beside her chair and taking both her hands in his. "Emma Jensen, I've fallen in love with you too. From the moment I saw you lying in that desert, something in me knew you were going to change my life. I love your strength, your courage, your kindness. I love the way you see the world, the way you make me want to be a better man. I love you, and if you'll have me, I want to spend the rest of my life proving it to you." Emma was crying now, but they were happy tears. "Are you asking me to marry you?" "I'm asking if you would consider it," Blake said carefully. "I know we should take our time, get to know each other better, but Emma, I've never been more certain of anything in my life. You're the one I want to build that ranch with, raise those horses with. You're the one I want to come home to every night." Emma cupped his face in her hands, her touch gentle. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes, I'll marry you, Blake. I don't need more time to know that you're the man I want to spend my life with." Blake stood, pulling Emma up with him, and kissed her for the first time. It was a gentle kiss, full of promise and hope and love. When they pulled apart, both were smiling. "We'll do this right," Blake said. "We'll wait until we get to California, meet your uncle, and have a proper wedding. But Emma, from this moment on, I consider you my future wife, and I will spend every day working to make you happy." "You already make me happy," Emma whispered, leaning her forehead against his. "You saved my life in more ways than one." They continued their journey to California with a new lightness in their hearts. The stage from Prescott to San Diego was long and dusty, but Blake and Emma barely noticed the discomfort. They were wrapped up in each other, making plans for their future, dreaming out loud about the life they would build together. When they finally arrived in San Diego in mid-August, the ocean breeze and the sight of the Pacific were like a dream. Emma had never seen the ocean before, and Blake took her down to the beach where they walked along the sand, their hands clasped together, talking about everything and nothing. "It's so beautiful," Emma breathed, watching the waves crash against the shore. "I never imagined anything could be so vast. It's like your heart," Blake said, pulling her close. "Big enough to hold all the love in the world." Emma laughed and swatted his arm playfully. "That's terribly romantic of you." "I'm a terribly romantic man when I'm in love," Blake replied with a grin. From San Diego, they took another stage north along the coast, through small settlements and vast stretches of California wilderness. The journey took another week, but finally, in late August, they arrived in Sacramento. Emma's uncle, Robert Jensen, was waiting at the stage depot when they arrived. He was a tall, weathered man in his 50s, with the same dark hair as Emma, now streaked with gray. When he saw Emma step down from the coach, his face crumpled with emotion. "Emma," he said, his voice thick with tears as he embraced her. "Thank God you're safe. When I got the telegram, I could hardly believe it. We heard about wagon train attacks, but we didn't know if you and Thomas were caught up in it." "Uncle Robert," Emma said, crying into his shoulder. "Papa's gone. The outlaws killed him." Robert held his niece tightly, grief and relief warring on his face. "I know, sweetheart. The marshal sent word. I'm so sorry. Thomas was a good man, a good brother, but you're here, you're safe, and that's what matters now." After several minutes, Emma pulled back and turned to Blake, who had been standing respectfully to the side. "Uncle Robert, this is Blake Rowland. He's the man who saved my life and brought me here to you. He's also the man I'm going to marry." Robert's eyebrows shot up, and he looked between Emma and Blake with surprise. "Well, that's quite a bit of news all at once." Blake stepped forward and extended his hand. "Mr. Jensen, I know this is sudden, and I want you to know that I understand if you have concerns. But I love your niece, and I intend to spend my life making her happy. I hope I can have your blessing." Robert shook Blake's hand firmly, studying him with keen eyes. "Any man who would bring my niece safely across half the country and ask for my blessing before marrying her has already earned some respect in my book. But I want to hear the whole story. Come, let's get your things to the ranch. We have a lot to talk about." Robert Jensen's ranch was a sprawling property about 10 miles outside Sacramento, with a comfortable house, several barns, and extensive pastures where cattle and horses grazed. As they rode out in Robert's wagon, Blake could see it was a well-established operation, the kind of place a man could be proud to call home. Over the next several days, Blake and Emma told Robert everything that had happened, from the attack on the wagon train to Blake finding Emma in the desert to their journey across the territories. Robert listened carefully, his expression grave when they spoke of the attack, softening when they described their growing feelings for each other. "I can see you two are in love," Robert said one evening as they sat on his front porch, watching the sun set over the California hills. Emma had gone inside to help Robert's housekeeper with dinner, leaving the two men alone. "But Emma's been through a tremendous trauma. Are you sure this isn't just gratitude and comfort-seeking on both your parts?" Blake had been expecting this question and had thought carefully about his answer. "Mr. Jensen, I won't lie and say the circumstances of how we met didn't affect how quickly things developed between us. But what I feel for Emma goes beyond that. She's strong, intelligent, kind, and brave. She challenges me to be better. She makes me laugh. She makes me want to build a life instead of just drifting from place to place. That's not gratitude, sir. That's love." Robert nodded slowly. "And what are your prospects, Blake? How do you plan to provide for my niece?" "I have about $2,000 saved," Blake said honestly. "I've been frugal over the years, taking jobs where I could. It's not a fortune, but it's enough to start. I'd like to buy some land, start a horse ranch. I know horses, Mr. Jensen. I'm good with them. With hard work, I could build something worthwhile." Robert was quiet for a long moment, then he turned to look at Blake directly. "What if I told you I have a proposition for you?" Blake waited, curious. "I'm not as young as I used to be," Robert continued. "This ranch is getting to be too much for one man to manage, even with hired help. I've been thinking about taking on a partner, someone I could trust to help run things and eventually take over when I'm too old to do it myself. I was planning to hire a foreman, but what if instead I offered you a partnership?" Blake stared at him, hardly daring to believe what he was hearing. "A partnership? You marry Emma. You become family," Robert said simply. You invest your savings into the ranch, help me expand the horse breeding operation I've been wanting to start, and in return you get a share of the profits and a stake in the land. Eventually, when I'm gone, the whole thing would go to you and Emma anyway. This way, you'd be building your future while helping me secure mine. Blake felt emotion well up in his throat. Mr. Jensen, I don't know what to say. That's incredibly generous. It's practical, Robert corrected, but there was warmth in his eyes. I can see you're a good man, Blake. You saved my niece's life and brought her safely to me. You've earned my trust. More importantly, Emma loves you, and that's good enough for me. So what do you say? Want to be a rancher? Blake extended his hand and Robert shook it firmly. Yes, sir. I'd be honored. When they told Emma the news, she threw her arms around both men, crying happy tears. This is more than I ever dreamed, she said. Blake, we can build our life here together with Uncle Robert. We can have the ranch you always wanted. And you can still teach if you want to, Blake added, remembering her dream. There's a school in Sacramento that's always looking for good teachers. Emma beamed at him. You remembered. I remember everything you tell me, Blake said softly. They were married 3 weeks later in early September 1882 at the small church in Sacramento. It was a simple ceremony, attended by Robert, some of the ranch hands, and a few families from the town who Robert knew. Emma wore a simple white dress that the local seamstress had made, and Blake wore a new suit that was slightly uncomfortable but made Emma smile when she saw him. As Blake stood at the altar and watched Emma walk down the aisle toward him, he felt a sense of completeness he had never known. This woman, whom he had found dying in the desert just 2 months ago, was about to become his wife. It seemed impossible, like something from a dream, but it was real. Dearly beloved, the minister began, and Blake barely heard the words. He was too focused on Emma, on the way her eyes shone with happiness, on the gentle smile playing on her lips. When it came time to say their vows, Blake spoke from the heart. Emma, the day I found you in the desert, I told you that you were safe with me. Today, I make that promise again for the rest of our lives. You're safe with me, you're loved by me, and I will spend every day I have proving that you made the right choice in saying yes to me. I love you with everything I am. Emma's voice was steady as she replied, though tears streamed down her face. Blake, you saved my life, but more than that, you gave me a reason to live again. You showed me that even in the darkest moments, hope can survive. I promise to love you, to stand by you, to build a life with you that would make my father proud. I love you, Blake Rowland, with all my heart. The minister pronounced them husband and wife, and when Blake kissed Emma, sealing their union, he felt as though everything in his life had been leading to this moment. The wedding celebration was held at Robert's ranch, with food and music and laughter. Blake danced with Emma under the stars, holding her close, marveling at how much his life had changed in such a short time. Are you happy? Emma asked, her head resting on his shoulder as they swayed to the music. I've never been happier, Blake replied honestly. You've given me everything I never knew I needed. We've given each other that, Emma corrected gently. I was lost, Blake, in more ways than one. You found me and brought me home. As the months passed, Blake and Emma settled into their new life on the ranch. Blake threw himself into the work, learning the business from Robert and implementing ideas for expanding their horse breeding program. He had a natural talent for working with horses, and soon they had several quality mares and a strong stallion, producing foals that fetched good prices at market. Emma, true to her dream, began teaching at the Sacramento school 3 days a week. She loved the work, loved seeing the children learn and grow, and she would come home full of stories about her students. In the evenings, Blake and Emma would sit together on the porch of the small house Robert had helped them build on the property, talking about their day, making plans for the future, simply enjoying each other's company. "I want to have children," Emma said one night, about 6 months after their wedding. "I want to fill our house with love and laughter." Blake pulled her close, kissing the top of her head. "I want that too. A whole brood of little ones running around, learning to ride horses and causing trouble." Emma laughed. "You make it sound chaotic." "It will be," Blake said with a grin. "And it will be perfect." Their first child, a son, was born in the fall of 1883, just over a year after they were married. They named him Thomas, after Emma's father, and Blake cried when he held his son for the first time, overwhelmed by the love he felt for this tiny person. Emma recovered well from the birth, and as young Thomas grew, they marveled at every milestone. The ranch prospered, with Blake's horse breeding program becoming well known throughout California. Robert, delighted to be a great uncle, spent hours teaching Thomas about the land and the animals. 2 years later, Emma gave birth to a daughter, whom they named Sarah. She had Emma's green eyes and Blake's dark hair, and she was the apple of her father's eye. Blake had never imagined he could love anything as much as he loved his family. As the years passed, the ranch grew and flourished. Blake and Robert expanded their holdings, purchasing adjacent land and increasing their herds. Emma continued to teach, becoming a respected figure in the Sacramento community. They had 2 more children, another son named Robert after Emma's uncle, and finally another daughter named Grace. In the summer of 1895, 13 years after Blake had found Emma in the desert, they stood together on the porch of their home, watching their children play in the yard. Thomas was 12 now, already showing signs of becoming a fine horseman like his father. Sarah was 10, bright and curious, with her mother's love of books. Robert was 7, adventurous and fearless, and Grace was 4, sweet and shy. "Can you believe this is our life?" Emma asked, leaning against Blake's shoulder. "Sometimes I still think I'm going to wake up and find it was all a dream," Blake admitted. "But then I see our children, see everything we've built together, and I know it's real." Emma turned to face him, reaching up to cup his cheek. "You told me I was safe with you that day in the desert. You've kept that promise every single day since. And I'll keep it for the rest of my life," Blake said, pulling her close. "You and our children are my whole world, Emma." "I love you, Blake Rowland," Emma whispered. "I love you, Emma Rowland," Blake replied, and kissed her tenderly. Years continued to roll by, bringing both joys and sorrows. Robert Jensen passed away peacefully in his sleep in 1898, leaving the ranch entirely to Blake and Emma. They mourned him deeply, but they also celebrated his life and the legacy he had helped them build. The children grew up strong and healthy. Thomas eventually took over much of the daily operations of the ranch, showing a natural aptitude for the work. Sarah, brilliant and ambitious, went to San Francisco to attend college, something that made Emma incredibly proud. Robert Jr. followed in his brother's footsteps, working the ranch and eventually starting his own horse training business. Grace, the youngest, married a kind doctor from Sacramento and settled nearby. As Blake and Emma entered their later years, they had the joy of seeing grandchildren born, of watching their family grow and flourish. The ranch they had built together became a gathering place for the whole family, a testament to what could be created when 2 people found each other against all odds. On a warm evening in June 1912, Blake and Emma sat together on their porch, as they had done thousands of times before. They were both in their 50s now, their hair gray, their faces lined with the years, but their love was as strong as it had been that day in Prescott when Blake had first told Emma he loved her. "Tell me the story again," Emma said softly, taking Blake's hand. Blake smiled. He knew exactly which story she meant. It was a hot day in July, 30 years ago. I was riding across the desert and I saw buzzards circling in the sky. When I rode closer, I found the most beautiful woman I had ever seen, lying in the sand, and I knew in that moment that my life was about to change forever. "You told me I was safe with you," Emma continued, as she always did when he told this story. "And you were," Blake said, bringing her hand to his lips and kissing it gently. "You always have been, and you always will be. Finding you that day was the best thing that ever happened to me, Emma. Everything good in my life started with you." Emma leaned her head on his shoulder, and they sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun set over the land they had built together, surrounded by the life they had created. Their children and grandchildren would later say that Blake and Emma Rowland were the most devoted couple they had ever known. They would tell the story of how Blake found Emma in the desert and saved her life, how that act of mercy had blossomed into a love story that spanned decades. They would talk about the ranch that Blake and Emma had built from almost nothing, about Emma's dedication to education, about Blake's skill with horses, about the family they had raised together. But most of all, they would remember the way Blake and Emma looked at each other, even after 30 years of marriage, with the same love and devotion they had felt from the beginning. They would remember how Blake would still tell Emma she was safe with him, and how Emma would smile and say that she had always known it, from that very first moment in the desert when she heard his voice and knew that her prayers had been answered. As the years continued and eventually, both Blake and Emma passed on, leaving their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren to carry on their legacy. The story of their love became family legend. It was told at gatherings, passed down through generations, a reminder that sometimes the most beautiful things in life come from the most desperate circumstances, that hope can survive even in the harshest desert, and that true love, once found, can weather any storm. The ranch that Blake and Emma built together remained in the family for generations, a physical testament to what they had created. But more than the land or the buildings or the success of the horse breeding program, their true legacy was the love they had shared and the family they had raised. They had shown their children and grandchildren what it meant to be devoted to one another, to work together toward common goals, to never give up even when circumstances seemed impossible. Blake had found Emma when she was lost and dying in the desert, but in truth, they had found each other. Two lost souls who had been searching for a place to belong had found it in each other's arms. He had told her she was safe with him, and she had trusted him with her life. That trust had grown into love, and that love had created a legacy that would endure long after they were gone. And on quiet evenings, when the family gathered at the old ranch house, sitting on the porch where Blake and Emma had spent so many hours together, they would look out at the land that their ancestors had tamed and built upon, and they would remember. They would remember the cowboy who found a lost woman in the desert, who took her into his arms and promised her safety. They would remember the woman who trusted a stranger and found her soulmate. They would remember the love story that started with 4 simple words that changed 2 lives forever. "You're safe with me now." Those words had been spoken in a moment of desperation, but they had become the foundation of a lifetime of love. Blake had meant them when he said them, and he had proven them true every single day for the rest of his life. And Emma, who had been so lost and afraid in that desert, had found not just safety in Blake's arms, but home, family, and a love that would last beyond their mortal years. Their story was one of hope triumphing over despair, of love growing from tragedy, of two people who refused to give up even when everything seemed lost. It was a story worth remembering, worth telling, worth celebrating. And for all the generations that came after them, Blake and Emma Rowland would always be remembered as proof that even in the wildest, harshest places, love could not only survive but thrive, creating something beautiful and lasting that would echo through the ages. The desert that had nearly claimed Emma's life had instead become the birthplace of a love story for the ages. The cowboy who had been drifting through life had found his purpose. The woman who had lost everything had gained more than she ever dreamed possible. Together, they had built a life, raised a family, and created a legacy of love that would never be forgotten. And somewhere, in the vast expanse of that Arizona desert where it all began, the wind still blows across the sand, carrying with it the echo of those four simple words that changed everything. You're safe with me now.